So good evening, everybody. My name is Bill Renault. I am the chair of the Master Development Planning Committee, and I'm joined by Vice Chair Annie Wilton, former Chief Frank Twiss, George Dow, and Ken Liziak, and we are the Master Development Planning Committee. Our game plan tonight is basically to give you a little bit of background on what we've been working on for the past couple of years and for the golf course property and the municipal complex plans that we've been looking at. What the plan is that we'll kind of go through a PowerPoint presentation here, which will probably last about 15-20 minutes or so. And then I think we'll turn it over for questions to the group. If any of you have questions, if you could just, before you hop in, if you could just state your name and address so we know who we're talking to, that would be great. If you are not on mute, and you're not if you're not talking, you hopefully could be on mute for us. That would be great, so we don't have some reverb stuff happening with the Zoom. That would be much appreciated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Annie Wilton to give us a little bit of the background, and then I'll jump in to talk a little bit about what we did in the planning process, and then Andy Sheehan, our town administrator, will also hop in to talk a little bit about some of the financing components. So Annie, if you'd be happy to take it away.
I am. Thank you, Bill. As Bill mentioned, I'm Annie Wilton. I live on Forest Street in Middleton, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This is a very, very exciting opportunity for Middleton. As many of you know, we did acquire the 105 South Main Street property, which was the former Middleton Golf Course. And our plan as a committee was to develop a plan for a municipal complex in this area. And the really exciting part of this is that we will be creating the safety facilities that we need. We will also be having a community center, which would be for everyone, and increase the meeting space that we desperately need in town, as well as providing the town with a town green for community events. And, okay, thanks. No, that's good, thanks. Next one would be great, thanks. So as many of you, just to sort of give you a little bit of background so that you understand where we're coming from, the Board of Selectmen had appointed a 7-person committee to sort of help initiate what are we going to do, hire a consultant, and sort of put together the plans. And as a reminder, you may remember we were able to acquire this incredibly large parcel of land, which is a very, very unique and special situation that many, many towns in Massachusetts are not able to do anymore. Some of the consultants had talked to us about trying to place buildings on cliffs, and so we're very, very fortunate that we have so much land that we can utilize. Part of our agreement is that 22.85 will be non-municipal use. 9.6 acres of the land is restricted and is conservation land. And then we have 13.25 acres for passive recreation. And we will maintain a 100-foot buffer all around the property. If you could go to the next, thanks. So one of the things that we realized very early on when we started investigating putting a municipal complex in this area is there's a tremendous need for all of the municipal facilities that we have that are not able, they're very outdated, they're undersized for the development of the town. This is one example of the fire station. Again, we have many more calls coming in. As you may see on the right, the only way to get to the second floor is that ancient staircase. It is not handicapped accessible. There is no training space, and there's inadequate space. There's very little storage, And if any of you have ever stood outside, I've been there a couple times for birthday parties, washing the fire. It's like inches that they have to park them in. So we have definitely a need for an updated and larger fire station. In addition to that, the police station, as many of you may know, was actually the Danvers police station, and we paid $1 for it, and they brought it over, and we've added onto it and renovated it over the years. But again, we have inadequate booking, holding cells. There's very little area for training, very little storage, and it really does not meet the needs of a modern police force the way it should. In addition to that, the Council on Aging, which is our senior center at this point, is in a building that was built in the 1800s. There's a very unreliable elevator. The air and cooling, heating system is very inadequate. As many of you may know, the parking lot is very constrained. And again, this is a population in Middleton that has grown substantially, and we need to be able to provide them with a safer, better place to meet. And our fourth building is obviously Memorial Hall. Again, another building that was built in the 1800s. There are massive structural deficiencies. There's a lot of structural problems. It's not handicap accessible. A lot of the systems are inefficient. And again, no meeting space because of the handicap accessible situation. So again, another building that is just not meeting the needs that the town has right now. This particular slide kind of gives you an overview of the growth of the town over so many years. And again, we've almost doubled our population. We've increased our fire and police calls substantially. And we've doubled our number of households. So and the other thing that was really important to us that we hadn't realized is the huge increase in our 65 plus population. Again, another example of where a community center would be wonderful for all of the community, but also for our seniors. So people have asked, well, who are we and how did you get started and what have you been doing? So we've been working for the last 2 years. All of the members of the committee are homeowners in the town. We have over 200 years of experience living here in town. And we also come from very diverse backgrounds. So we have civil engineers, business people, construction, building people, commercial, residential. So it was a very, very good group of people. And then we hired HKT out of Charlestown to help us with the design. They did a ton of work evaluating our existing buildings, creating all kinds of analysis for us to review, figuring out space needs, not just now, but way into the future. So these buildings will allow for the town to continue to grow as well as meet the needs that we're going to have as the years go by. And we looked at a lot of different site options and plans. And I believe, Bill, I'm going to now pass it on to you.
There we go. Let me just unmute myself. There we go.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Annie. So, so we began some community engagement back in 2019 with a couple of design charrettes. And what we did is we basically had a bunch of paper out for residents to come in and sketch up some ideas and what they thought and how we should be using the property as a whole. Again, we have the front section of the parcel, if you remember from Annie's first slide on with that showed the restrictions. Essentially, the back half of the property is going to be preserved as a essentially as conservation land in open space. The front section is really what we were focusing on, and trying to essentially plan out where the building should go, thinking about the future needs that we may have in the years to come. Also looking at a location for our new town common and trying to incorporate that into the site. And then any other future needs that we may think would happen down and providing some space for that to happen. We started off, if you look at the bottom of the slide here, if you follow my cursor, these 4 little sketches was really where we initially started. We looked at separate buildings. We looked at combining buildings. We looked at a bunch of different layouts that, some that provided the town common in between, what would this red section would be a proposed public safety building. Down here, we looked at separating the police and the fire, having the town hall, that's the green box, being a separate building, and then having the community center, a separate building, and kind of putting that essentially across the front of 114. We also looked at basically combining the town hall and community center as a separate building that is, on opposite ends of the frontage of the building. And as we continue to move forward, what we kept hearing from the residents that attended our events were really they wanted to see more of a complex in this L shape, and that became really the major theme to kind of move forward with. So as we went through and finalized, this is essentially what we came up with as our preferred concept from the feedback we received and the committee's opinion as well. So what you're looking at is a police and fire station that is a combined public safety facility located towards the northern portion of the site. That would provide access to 114 through the front for the fire department. And then for the police, they would have their own separate little access that's here. Parking would for the police and fire use would be kind of contained within their section of the lot. And a new boulevard essentially being created through the middle of the site that would provide access to a new town hall that would be the smaller area here on the back building, and then a community center as well. This loop road provides access for the Council on Aging to do drop-offs and pickups. And then essentially a bunch of parking here to support the building uses for the community center, the town hall, but then again, the town common, which is another big piece of the project as well. If you look at this aerial view, this is looking from 114. This would be our proposed public safety building. This would be the proposed town hall, with the community center being this larger section to the left-hand side of the photograph. These show some renderings, and again, these aren't decided. I would say that we have essentially a space plan and what we need space-wise. Finishes and materials and that type of stuff is going to be part of the next phase, and these are really just shown to represent what this could end up looking like. So this is looking at the public safety building from Town Hall on the site that I showed you before. So this would be that main boulevard coming in I was referring to. This would be the police section of it, while the fire department would be more towards the right here. And then this on the bottom photo that you're looking at is looking from 114 into the site you can see the fire apparatus base here on the right-hand side. And then the central entrance to the shared public safety building here off of that main boulevard road coming in. So for the community center and town hall configuration, you'll notice that this kind of pinkish color here, or I guess it would be pink, is the proposed community center sizing. The intent here is to have, essentially a very adaptable space with walls that can be removed and retransformed to provide, not only locations for meetings, but, again, it's a community center, so it's not really geared just towards seniors, although that's a major aspect of what we're looking at. It would also provide the ability for, youth groups and really for the whole community to use the building and to provide a bunch of different programs and space for the different needs of the community going forward. The section in the yellow here is the proposed town hall area, looking at the different town departments and what their spatial needs are. The rendering down here, we have essentially a main entryway that's being shown with this big vestibule. On the left-hand side is our community center area, and then to the right would be the proposed town hall. So obviously it costs money to build these buildings. So we did a pretty substantial cost analysis, and I'm not expecting you to go through or read and understand what all this is, but essentially the roll-up is we looked at a couple of things. We heard questions about, what would happen if we delayed the project? That was one question we heard. We also heard, well, have you looking at maintenance of the buildings and what that costs, or have you looking at rehabilitation? So the answer to that is yes. We've looked at all of those different alternatives. So we looked at essentially three main alternatives: a maintenance, which essentially would keep all the buildings where they are and just do, kind of the Band-Aid approach that we've been doing for the past few years. In doing that analysis, we took an average of our last 20 years of funds that we've put into these buildings, and essentially put that into an annual cost for fiscal $22. That's what this $325,000 represents. We looked at that through a horizon of three different construction years. Fiscal 22, we looked at fiscal 25, so delaying it about 3 years. Then we looked at fiscal 2030, which would be delaying it about 8 years. As you can see, the dollars, this shows escalation of money across this, but also the additional costs that we'd have to do to continue to maintain the buildings. So in fiscal 2030, we'd be looking at almost $1.5 million to continue to maintain our buildings. And, I would focus that as a maintenance, no improvements, really, these inadequate buildings just being essentially held together with glue and duct tape, essentially. Then we looked at our rehabilitation options. And in that, it was essentially an evaluation from the architects that we hired in the architectural group to look at each building specifically and what the needs would be for each building for a gut renovation with minor additions, with the understanding that each site has their own site constraints. So as we evaluated those, we saw, within the next year, we're looking at a range of $2.2 million to $9.4 million. If we were to essentially rehabilitate each of these buildings and do them all at once, that's about $27 million worth of rehabilitation. Again, still not meeting the needs, still keeping these on the same lots and locations that they are, but making smaller enhancements where feasible and with an ability to. That escalates all the way to about $41.3 million in fiscal 2030. Again, for buildings that essentially will not meet the town's needs, but would provide some improvement from what we have today. So as we continue to evaluate over our last couple of years, one important thing happened was with the pandemic, a lot of the interest rates across the country came down. As part of that, that really allows us to actually get a much better interest rate for any borrowing or debt service that we would look to do. So, so we started to look at the whole project as a whole. As we see, the project that we're proposing is at $61.7 million in today's dollars. That escalates up to about $84 million in 2030. The big takeaway here is that, by spending the money today, essentially we'd be looking to just rehabilitate the buildings in 8 years. We'd be looking at about 2/3 of that cost, which to us, when you look at the current climate we're in financially with the interest rates, it made a lot of sense to the board to move this forward as one big clump, as opposed to trying to segregate it or phase it. Because we were looking at all of those options as we moved forward originally. But in this climate, it seemed pretty clear to us that it made the most sense to start forward. Several of our other peer communities have been doing the same thing. So we looked at peer community projects that have happened since, I think we went back to about 2016. And we looked at about 15 different towns that have done similar projects, whether it's a new fire station, some have been public safety buildings, some have been community centers and athletic complexes. And really looked at what their per square foot cost is compared to what we were proposing to move forward. So as you can see, rather than getting into the individual detail of each one, we had some ranges that went all the way up to $1,600 per square foot to build, the fire station in Lexington. Some are as low as $651 per square foot. Average across all of the ones we looked at was about $838 per square foot. The proposal we're looking at is about $925 per square foot. So we're definitely in the median with what's being proposed. We're not looking to build what I call a Taj Mahal here for the town of Middleton. I think we're trying to find something that is that middle ground, and something that'll serve the community for a long time to come. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk about the financing and debt schedule and kind of how we would look to finance this and how that will impact our taxes as a community. Andy?
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Annie. So as Bill mentioned, the total project cost, if we do it if we approve it this year and go right into the design, total project cost for the entire project is $61.7 million. We know that's a big ask. We know that's a big number, and we, there's no way to sugarcoat that. And so we've undertaken an evaluation to make this project have the smallest impact that it can possibly have on the taxpayers. We'll borrow over 30 years for this project. We'll start with you'll notice on the slide there, BAN. A BAN is a bond anticipation note, so it's essentially a short-term note that we would borrow for, and that's for the design period. We'd then go into a permanent financing, essentially a mortgage, if you want to think of it that way. And what we've done is we've structured this borrowing in such a manner that we push out some of the early impact and allow some of our existing debt to fall off. So the Flint Library comes off in 2027. The Howe Manning School comes off in 2033. The debt for those comes off in those years. The peak impact of this project is in 2034. So we're taking advantage of that existing debt that's coming off the books in 2033, and then we'll ramp up the debt for this project. The average single-family home in Middleton right now is $640,000. The impact in the first year on that average single-family home is about $352, and the peak year impact in 2034 is about $1,152. The impact declines after that. So after 2034, it's below 1152. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to even improve that picture. So we know that we have other funding sources available to us, and some of them are identified. Some of those we know what the amounts are. Some of them we don't know the amounts yet, and some we have projected, but don't have clear numbers on. We know we're getting a contribution of $225,000 from the developer of 59 South Main Street. That's the condo project that's going in to the left of Angelica's, 45 units in there, and the developer is making a contribution that would be applied to this project. We've already received a grant of $25,000 towards the design and construction of the public safety building. We'll be undertaking a capital campaign. For those of you that were in town 15 years ago when the Flint Library was being renovated, you may recall that the Friends of the Flint did a robust fundraising campaign, and that was fundraising beyond just Middleton. So it wasn't just residents of Middleton. It was businesses. It was Beverly Hospital, other large entities like that. So we would anticipate a similar kind of fundraising effort that would offset some of the costs of this project. The Community Preservation Committee, you'll see CPA there in the fourth bullet. Community Preservation Committee has already indicated its willingness and intention to make a first contribution towards the development of the common at this project. There is a line item for $300,000 on this year's town meeting, and the Community Preservation Committee has indicated that that would be followed up by additional contributions in future years. We also have a number of parcels of land that we don't need. One of them is one of the buildings that we'll be vacating as a result of this project. We know we don't have a use for the police station site once we vacate that property. We also know that it is commercially zoned in a an attractive location. So there's market value for that property. So we'll be looking to dispose of that property once we move out of it. We own a piece of land over on School Street that we're looking to get rid of, and also a piece on Locust Street that we don't need and we'll look to get rid of. So we'll take the proceeds generated from the sales of those properties and we'll put that into a dedicated fund, essentially what we call a stabilization fund. And then we can draw from that. It'll grow, so it's invested and it will grow in time. And then we can draw from that to offset the impact of the principal and interest on taxpayers in Middleton. We'll also take the tax revenue that is generated from the redevelopment of those properties, and we'll dedicate that revenue towards the debt service on this project as well. So we'll take those proceeds and we'll put them into that stabilization fund as well. I mentioned that we've already received a grant in the amount of $25,000. We know that we'll have advocacy on our behalf by our legislative delegation, Senator Tarr and Representatives Cairns and Jones, and we're hopeful and confident that they'll be able to help to identify additional sources of funding for us. And any of that funding that comes in directly benefits you as taxpayers, because it just means that it's less that we have to rely on you for. The other thing that that we haven't talked too much about, and we're waiting on some of the details, is the federal money that will be coming our way under the American Recovery Plan Act. We'll be receiving, Middleton will receive a couple of $1 million, about $3 million, and we're hopeful that we can use some of that towards the design and construction of this project. One of the benefits of that funding is that we can use it to design some energy efficiencies into this project that might otherwise not be possible because they sometimes have carry a larger cost. The benefit is down the road, for every year that we're in these buildings, when you have renewable energy and other amenities like that, it reduces the cost of operating those buildings, reduces our electricity, heating, and cooling costs. So what we've called the conservative case is what I laid out a couple of minutes ago on the previous slide. The alternative funding, which we think is very much within reach, is about $2.3 million. That gets the impact on the average single-family residence in 2034 at about $1,152. The better case scenario essentially doubles that amount, and that better case comes about as a result of some additional fundraising, some additional grants, and other things like that. We think that is also within reach. That will bring the maximum peak year impact on the average single family home down to about $1,000. And then the best case scenario is essentially twice that better case scenario. And that is if we receive significant grant funds from the state or from other sources. We've been in touch with our federal legislator, Congressman Moulton. We don't know how that will turn out, but we're hopeful that we can get some assistance from not only our state delegation, but our federal delegation as well. And all of that, again, helps to reduce the impact on taxpayers. So in terms of comparison, and we always like comparisons. We like to look at what's going on around us. Bill showed the slide of other similar projects, mostly public safety projects, and that's a good barometer for telling us and telling you where this project stands in comparison with other projects. We also, here in Middleton, we always compare ourselves to Boxford and Topsfield. We're all part of the Tri-Town Elementary Union. We're part of Masconomet. We're all sort of linked. There's a lot of cross-pollination, if you will, between the three communities. The current average single-family home in Boxford is about $683,000. In Topsfield, it's about $609,000, and in Middleton, it's $640,000. So we're in the middle. The tax rates, though, as you see on that slide in front of you, Middleton is low by more than $2 per thousand, and the average tax bill, we're lower by about $2,200. So even with the impact that we've laid out in the sort of in the conservative scenario, we'll still be significantly below Topsfield and Boxford when this project comes on. And again, that's assuming the $352 impact in year one, which is fiscal year 2022, which starts on July 1 of this year, and then the peak year impact in 2034 of $1,152. So we're in the middle of our outreach campaign. Or I guess not in the middle, where maybe we're in the early stages of it. Still, the graphic that you see on the left of this slide, with the pale greens and blues and peach colors, that's a one-page infographic that we've put together that just sort of touches on the highlights of the project. Lays out the timeline of how we acquired the property and how we got to this point. I will draw your attention to the QR code at the bottom right of that infographic. And if you take a picture of that with your smartphone, that'll bring you right to the town's webpage, the project webpage, which is in the middle of this slide. And that is that's constantly updating as we put additional information up. We'll have this presentation, this PowerPoint presentation on there. We'll have links to Master Development Planning Committee meetings and other things up there, meeting minutes. All the reports are up there already from HKT Associates, the architectural firm that helped us to get to this point. So I encourage everybody to look at the website. Again, you can reach that through the QR code, or you can just go to middletonma.gov, scroll down just a little ways and click on the Public Facilities Project link, and that'll bring you right to the page. So in terms of the schedule or the timeline from this point forward, the town meeting this year got pushed out a few weeks as a result of COVID and our need to meet outside. It's still really problematic to meet in the schools where we would normally hold our town meeting. So we're holding the town meeting on June 5th, which is a Saturday, beginning at 9 a.m. And that will be on the soccer field behind Memorial Hall at 48 South Main Street. And people can park across the street at Angelica's. Chris Kakoulis at Angelica's has been gracious enough to lend us the parking lot. We'll have officers out there to get people safely across the street. So 9 a.m. on June 5th for the town meeting. This is Article 22 on the warrant. This requires a 2/3 vote, and requires a 2/3 vote because we're borrowing. And the 2/3 has nothing to do with the scope or size of the project or the cost of the project. Whether we're borrowing $61 million for a project like this, or we're borrowing $50,000 for a police cruiser, it requires a 2/3 vote. So if we get that 2/3 vote, that's step one in the approval process. The following Saturday, June 12th, is the town election. That will be at Fuller Meadow School, where our elections are normally held. And so the election is for all of the normal offices that we elect at this time of year: selectmen, school committee, Masconomet, planning board, you name it. In addition to that, there is a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion question. And that debt exclusion question is to allow us to raise additional funds above and beyond what is normally allowed under Proposition 2.5, and that would pay for the bonds and the debt service associated with this project. The Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion vote is a simple majority vote, so it's unlike the town meeting vote, which is the 2/3. The ballot question is a simple majority. Those vote quantums are laid out in the statutes of Massachusetts. They apply to every city, all 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. If we are so fortunate to get approval, we'll go right into the design of the project. The first thing we'll do is retain what's called an owner's project manager, an OPM. And an OPM is essentially our eyes and ears and advocate for the design and construction of the project. The state, in its wisdom, recognized a long time ago that a lot of cities and towns don't have the internal capacity for a project, for big projects. So we're required to bring in an OPM, an owner's project manager. We'll do that first. They'll help us in the recruitment of a design firm, and we'll get right into the design. Design will last, we expect, 9 to 12 months. And then around this time next year, we would hope to be out to bid for a general contractor and what are known as filed subcontractors. Once we award the contract or contracts, we'll go into construction. We would expect that to start in the middle of 2022 if everything goes okay and goes according to plan. It's about a 24-month construction period, so that would have us occupying the buildings in 2024. The project would be to construct all of the buildings or both of the buildings at once. There are benefits to doing it that way. There are economies of scale in doing it that way. So when you hire a contractor, they come in, that's their mobilization, bringing in all of their equipment, their heavy equipment, their construction trailers, all that business. There's a cost to that. If we do this all at once, there's a single charge for that. And so they'll get in, they'll dig in one spot for one building, then they'll move to the other one. The concrete people will come in, they'll do the concrete work, and then they'll jump to the other building, so on and so forth through the entire project. So about a 2-year construction period, as I mentioned, and occupancy in 2024. So that is the presentation for this evening. Annie and Bill and the rest of the committee, Frank Twiss, George Dow, and Ken Lysiak are also on, as Bill mentioned at the beginning. And we're here to take your questions. We hope that there are questions, because the more information that we can provide now, the better we think you'll be educated and prepared to vote on June 5th and again on June 12th.
Andy, do we want to just note that with our presentations that we've had so far, we have gone to the Finance Committee. They unanimously recommended to move forward with the project. I think that's something important that we should note. And then I don't know if Costa, I saw Costa's on. I don't know if any of the other selectmen are on, if anybody wants to speak before we open it up for questions.
Bill, yeah, I will say, a couple of words. I think it's, important to know that in the town office part of, the building with the community center, it is not just for the offices that are now at Memorial Hall. It would also unite, all the other town departments that are currently, down the street in North Main Street, the planner, the inspectional services, the health department, so that I think it'll make the town government operate more efficiently, and it will help, residents that have, business with, multiple departments by being able to go to one location instead of having to shuttle back and forth between two. The other thing that I would draw people's attention to is the town does have municipal facility planning principles. They were drafted by the Master Plan Committee and presented to town meeting and adopted in May of 2009. And those principles talk about combining uses, which this proposal does. It talks about, siting the facilities so as to minimize land purchase. We already own this parcel. It talks about sizing and looking not just for the immediate needs of the town, but looking further out so that we don't have to go through what we have in the past where we outgrow the facilities. And it talks about, financing, in this case, we are not layering the projects, but we are layering the financing so that we are taking advantage of debt service, retiring. For people that want to take a closer look at those, they can be found at section 53-2C, in the town code.
Phil, if I may jump in right here, Mr. York asked a question that I think really needs to be answered. He said, what if this doesn't pass at town meeting? I don't have an answer.
I can take a stab at that, George. I'm glad you jumped in. I was going to respond to that anyways. When we negotiated the purchase of this property from the prior owners of the golf course.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Sure. Yeah. So the question was, what happens if town meeting says no? What happens with the property? And so when we negotiated the purchase of this property 2 years ago, there were certain conditions placed on that transaction. And we are limited to using this only for municipal uses. So we cannot, a lot of people have asked, can we do sort of a mixed use so that there's some revenue generation on the property, whether it's commercial or residential or senior living or something like that. We cannot do that. We could theoretically sell the property, but we could only sell it for a municipal use. So it would be limited, it's limited by the chain of title to municipal use. And so we would not look to sell the property. We would have to go back and figure out what plan B is, but selling the property for development is not in the cards. And if I can, somebody chimed in the chat feature asking, so whose idea was it to buy the property with the restrictions? The sellers were adamant that they wanted to see this used for a municipal use. They did not want to see it developed for residential or commercial uses. They had been approached, and they had, as I understand it, they had been approached and had rebuffed the offers that were made to them. So we paid $3.8 million for this property. The true market value of this property, if they wanted to sell it for development, was probably in the order of $7 to $8 million, maybe even a little bit more, because of its proximity and generally good soils, especially at the front of the property.
Couple of other questions, Andy, on, am I muted? No, not, okay. A couple of other questions that we heard in the chat. What's the tax impact of the library and today? In other words, what will be the average tax decrease for each household once each of those two buildings are paid off? Thanks.
So the tax impact numbers that I mentioned, those are the impacts of this project. We currently have about $1.2 million per year in what we call debt service. Think of it as your mortgage payment, your principal and interest. So $1.2 million will be coming off each year between now and 2034.
There's also a question about the restrictions, and I believe, we talked about that when we acquired the property, about all of the restrictions. The presentation that I saw from you, Andy, that was pretty clear that this was for municipal purposes. We also got the property, if you recall, for well below market value, probably 50% of market value, if not below. So just to make that clear. I guess rather than going through the chat, if we want to open it up to any other questions, I believe there's a raised hand feature. I don't know if we want to use that or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question. As long as it stays orderly, we can keep moving forward.
So I have a question. Annette Coveney, I'm a 30 Old Haswell Park Road, Middleton resident since 15 years now. And I was at the town meeting and I voted for the town to buy this property. To get rid of all the old stuff that we had. And there was at the time, there'd been several town meetings where people had rebutted various projects, but buying this piece of land to move and to kind of create more of a community center was voted for. My question is, there's been some numbers flying around, 60 million-ish. And I missed the first part of this presentation, so I apologize. Is it, is that kind of like the market right at this moment, or where are we at with that? Where, several bids or just one, or?
So I can take a stab at that, Andy. Yeah. So I mean, we're required to go through a public bidding process, so that will dictate what the final price is. We have an estimate that has, that looked at basically current projects in the area. So to answer your question, we looked at the square foot cost that kind of escalated up to $2021 to compare, this project with about 15 other projects in what I would consider to be peer communities, and we're in line with the number of those projects. We're actually, I'd say, I think we're about $15 or $20 per square foot cheaper with the proposal that's here. The proposal moving forward to town meeting is for $2.7 million. That's what our current estimate is at. So I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you. And I think there was a question, how on this chat about how many is town officials. I'm certainly not a town official. I'm just somebody that lives in Middleton. And I also want to say that for anybody who's not a town official, I have certainly gotten all the mileage I could possibly get out of the Howe Manning School, which I was at the town meeting and voted through. That went through, I think, the third time we voted for Howe Manning and the different, constitutions of where it would be and how to build it and all that stuff. And finally, we worry about these tax payments, and I'm not saying that money isn't worth anything, but we have to think about the community, the town. Oxford and Topsfield are different towns. We have a lot of services in Middleton, and I personally support this project, considering that it is my taxpayer money that's going here. So.
Okay, well, thanks. Looking back to the chart quickly.
I have a question.
Oh, 1 second. Let me just go to the chat, and then I'll jump to you, Art, in 2 seconds. Okay. Is there a ramp-up chart showing the tax rate ramp-up detail for the years 23, 24, 25, et cetera? And to answer that, we do have a spreadsheet that lays all that stuff out. We didn't put it into the PowerPoint itself. Andy, I don't know if you want to share that, or if we want to maybe, we can provide that on the website or at the next public meeting, which is next Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, we can pull that out and put that on the website, or however the committee would like to do it. I can put it on the website if you like. Yeah. We've got the debt, what we call the debt model from our financial advisors that we can put up. Sure, I think that would be useful. Yeah, and we can get that out. I mean, DPASD, I'm not sure who that is, but if you want to send your contact information, we can email that out to you as well.
Andy, if I could just interject, Annette brought up the subject of the Howe Manning School. You might show that what that school would cost if we tried to rebuild it today.
Yeah,
The cost of waiting is really outrageous.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ken. So I had a conversation a few months ago with one of the architects that worked on the Howe Manning project for us. He was our OPM, our owner's project manager. The Howe Manning project was just a shade over $25 million in 2009. We got very lucky in terms of the construction climate that was right at the trough of the Great Recession. So $25.1 million for that project at that time. I don't have the numbers in front of me. The per square foot cost was something like $225 or $250 per square foot. That project now, based on the escalation that they have seen in Eastern Mass in comparable projects, would be about $500 per square foot and about $50 million. So about double what it was 12 years ago. So we didn't get in too deep into the cost escalation, but when the committee looked at some of those examples, that really drove the discussion and the recommendation that they eventually settled on to do the entire project at once, because you spread this out over 2 phases or 4 phases over 15 or 20 years, and it becomes an extraordinarily expensive project, and it doesn't really provide much relief to the taxpayer in the interim. So, I know Art had a question, and I'll stop so we can get to his question.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. Couple things just brought up with the Howe Manning School. A square foot cost of $220,000. Projected cost now would, even if it's $400, it's still not $800 a square foot that you're projecting for this property. I think this can be built down for less money. It doesn't have to be 2-story fancy. I'm for the project, but I think that we're taking big city approach to small town building. You know, we don't have to spend more than we need to. But that wasn't even my question. That just happened to come up. On the presentation, you had mentioned the sale of 3 parcels of land, the police station, Locust Street, and School Street. What about the fire station? What about Memorial Hall and the parcel behind it? And since we're building a big community center with plenty of parking, why couldn't we also sell the East Street property? What is it, Rebenchuk Field? I'm not sure of the pronunciation of the name. And also the stuff that's on Natsu Way. The parcel on Natsu Way.
Yeah.
I mean, those are unrestricted. Those are unrestricted. Now, the town, when they bought this property, probably should have tweaked, you know, maybe you got it at a discount because your hands are tied on this. And if they could have done whatever they wanted to, but the town got restricted. So now you have to look at ways to do what the plan is to develop these facilities, but also maybe we have to give up some things in order to make it more feasible for the town, the people in town to buy this. You know, if you're saying, well, we can sell the Natsu Way property down at the transfer station and get rid of those fields, it's industrial property, and we can sell that for $3 or $4 million. I think people would look at that and say, okay, well, we'll sell it $3 million here. The Memorial Hall with the field behind it is another $1 million or $2 million. The East Street property is another $2 or $3 million. If we're making this giant, family-friendly Middleton property where all the sports can be, all the fields can be, there's enough acreage for everybody, and not hurt our restrictions with the purchase, I think this is what would maybe turn a lot of people's minds. That if we're going to sell property and bring in $8 or $9 or $10 million, then it's a little easier to swallow. That's just my 2 cents. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, now if I can just make one point.
Yeah, sure.
You know, people need to be careful about comparing, you know, square footage cost. The cost of public construction is extraordinarily more than private construction, and I've seen and heard many comments about, well, you know, we can build this for this much less. Well, that's private construction. You know, public construction, you have to pay prevailing wages, and it inflates the cost of construction.
The construction
Yeah,
costs, still, I was comparing the Howe Manning School to 2009 to current costs to future costs in a year. If this project goes out to bid, you shouldn't go from $400 to $800 a square foot. And I've built properties. And if this was a commercial building, you'd know that somebody be in there building this for less than 150.
Without a doubt. We
We
don't disagree.
When you say it could be built commercially for 200, and the property that's getting built right now, Blue Haven, you bet they're not paying more than $200 a square foot to build that property, all completed.
oh, of course not.
When you say when you use 800 as a number, that's a scary number to people. And 800 never is 800; it becomes 900.
Sure. No, we heard your question. I mean, I heard 3 questions out of that. So I heard the question on the square footage. That was one piece.
Thank you.
I heard the question about selling off these other properties, and then I also heard about trying to develop other parts of the subject parcel. So first, looking at the square footage, this is the slide that kind of lays that out. We were talking about big city numbers. I mean, if you look at the comparison, these are all towns. I mean, we're not, aside from Medford maybe, all of these are similar communities to what we have here. The cost for public construction is a completely different animal from private construction. We have to pay prevailing wage rates. Those are all set by the state. You have to go through a bidding process. That's all laid out by the state. So we really don't have the same luxury as a private developer to go and shop prices around and to get it down to the same numbers you're talking. So, I mean, looking at you know, essentially example projects, we looked at 15 different projects in communities that have done it since 2015, escalating those to $20 million. And this lays all that out. Some more background and more background information on it, but ultimately that is the cost of doing business. And, you know, I would say that we are below the overall project, you know, average cost. So that's the first question. Second question is on, you know, looking at fields for the parcel. So when we acquired the property, with the back half of this, with the conservation restrictions, we have restrictions on whether or not fields can go in there or not. So it's for passive recreation. So if the fields were to be installed anywhere on this property, it would have to be in the front half of the parcel. So just so it's clear on what our restrictions are. And those other parcels that you mentioned, you know, maybe they do get disposed of in the future, and we evaluate that. What I'm doing, as I looked at the cost of the debt schedule, I think the big piece was that as we look, you know, with the alternative sources of funding, you know, you brought up $1 million. Let's say we added $1 million on top of it, right? You're seeing very small, you know, decreases. And granted, they're real dollars. I get that, and I definitely think that, you know, the cheapest what we can build this for is what we want to try to do. But if you start looking at the, you know, the best case scenario, so if we were able to get another $7.2 million of additional revenue to apply towards this project, we would be saving about $350 per year. So there's no golden bullet here to come up with a big chunk of dough to make this not have an impact to the community sector. We know that that's the case. Part of that is delayed, delaying on making a move on any of these things. So, you know, I think that's a big piece of it. So I think those are the 3 questions I heard. So
Can I just follow up with that, Bill?
of course you can. Yeah, please.
I brought those up as a point of selling this project. I mean, you've got to get the vote at town meeting.
Well, I'm aware.
And you know, and I think that you need to have different ideas or maybe different directions sometime to sell this project. Because I think the money is astronomical, and so don't most people. But that was just my 2 cents, and I couldn't understand why those parcels weren't included in this alternative sources of funding.
So if I could go back to your original question, Art, in terms of the fire station is only about 1/4 of an acre, doesn't have much value. It's poorly situated. We would expect to, and we will recommend to the Board of Selectmen, or the committee will recommend to the Board of Selectmen, and I myself as the town administrator will recommend that we demolish that building and build some green space adjacent to the library. And I know you're a library supporter. And also some parking that would service the library. The library has a shortage of parking now. So some extra spaces on that parcel will help them out. The property at Memorial Hall and the property at the Old Town Hall, those are outside the scope of the Master Development Planning Committee. So those are, they're excellent points, and Bill and I had that conversation yesterday, I think, about the disposition of those properties. Those are decisions that will be made by the Board of Selectmen as the chief executive officers of the town. But I think those are things that they're going to look at. Natsu Way is another one that we haven't talked about too much lately, but there is some potential development there. And depending on how those parcels shake out, or the disposition of those parcels shake out, ties right into this conservative, better, best case scenario slide that Bill has up right now. If we can bring in, by selling those other properties, additional funds, that reduces the tax impact on every property. And that's what we hope to do.
Andy, the other point that should be made is that the only body with authority to dispose of town property is town meeting. A suggestion can be made to town meeting, but without town meeting approval, the selectmen can't sell anything, the finance committee can't sell anything. And it's not just the authority to dispose of the property, the disposition of public property carries costs with it, doing appraisals to make sure that you get the proper value. And so town meeting also has to authorize the money to do that. Several years ago, town meeting authorized the sale of Locust Street, but it rejected giving the money to do the things to be able to dispose of it. And that's what has led to a citizen's petition that is part of the special town meeting at the beginning of the annual town meeting, for asking the town to allocate the money for that purpose.
I think that's why there's another article at town meeting this year for, what is it, $20,000 for the selectmen to hire, a consultant to conduct appraisals to settle down property. And, it's almost, tied to this article to build a new municipal complex. That's how we're going to get the additional revenue from the sale of town property. If they can't appraise, can't hire an appraisal, they can't sell it, so we will not benefit from the sale of any property.
So,
Did I say that right?
well, yes, it's all 100% accurate. So before I hop back to the chat questions, anybody else here have a question that we could hopefully answer for you? All right, not hearing anybody. Let me jump to the chat. So one gentleman or person, I'm not sure, male or female, is asking, first off, how many of you are town officials? I believe we have Andy. And
Myself, the Council on Aging Director, and the Fire Chief, I think, are the only town officials.
Yep. Well, and Costa, obviously, but he's representing the Board of Selectmen. So.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
And I am a resident and taxpayer.
That you are. That you are. So when are we locked into this cost? So So what we have to do is go through public bidding laws. So this would have to go out for a bid, a public bid. The first piece would be for our OPM, and then to hire the architect to design it. Those would be the first rounds of costs. That's done through a request for proposal process where we look at qualifications. So it's a qualifications-based contract award. And then we negotiate a fee for that. So that's the first process. And then that will go out to bid, and we would take the low bidder that's qualified for the project as the contractor to construct it. That would happen within the time frame. So if we were to get approval with town meeting this year, we would move into the RFP process pretty quickly. The first portions of that have to go, I would say, Andy, within probably within the first 3 months after town meeting, I'd imagine.
I would expect so, yes.
Right, and then so they will go through a design phase after that. That design phase, and we had the time slide, was about a year to design it, and then construction would start a little bit further beyond. So for the bonding, we are essentially able to go out for certain portions of it. We have to have the bid in for each piece, right, Andy, to actually, or can we bond?
We can bond earlier than that if we're comfortable doing so.
Okay, so when would you look to do that, do you think?
I think they have December is the projected timeline for that. The other thing that, if I can jump in for a sec, Bill, I mentioned that we rely on our financial advisors for the debt information. That's a firm that specializes in helping public agencies borrow money. And as you would expect, and as you would hope, they take a very conservative approach to this. The projection that they're using is based on 3.5% interest. If the sooner we can go out, the better we'll be able to take advantage of the current rate environment. What we're seeing in Massachusetts for similar rated communities to Middleton is on the order of 1.5 to 1.75%. So 61.7 million is the architect's estimate of the project cost. The 3.5% is the projected interest rate. If we can get out this year for bid, for borrowing rather, we would expect to be well under that 3.5%.
Yeah. So again, we are showing a conservative case, for alternative funding sources and within our bonding numbers that we're. Back to the chat. Will the state be providing any project funding for police and fire services? Middleton provides the DYS facility and the prison.
Yeah, that is a touchy subject, and that is something that the Board of Selectmen has talked about for as long as I've been here. And I have spoken with our delegation, our Massachusetts delegation, about it. The board has spoken with them in the past as well, and I know that we'll have additional conversations with them coming up. That is an answer we can't give we can't give you a firm answer on. We would hope so. We, as far as we can tell, are one of the only communities that hosts a county correctional facility that does not receive a payment in lieu of taxes. We've got the jail, we've got the DYS facility, the regional dispatch center at the jail property. We don't receive any funding for any of that, and our firefighters respond, well, about 10 or 12% of their call volume is to those facilities. So we think we've got a compelling argument for the delegation, and I think they're easy to convince. It is the remaining members of the House and Senate on Beacon Hill that are hard to convince, but we're going to continue to beat the drum on that.
Let's see.
I would also comment that I have a relationship with both reps, and once we have a project in front of us, I will be on their case to come up with some.
Let's see. We have a comment about this would make an awesome restaurant space. I don't necessarily disagree with that. So thank you for that comment.
Unfortunately, Bill, a restaurant needs, a septic system of a certain size,
know the drill.
And that, is not very feasible in that location. The lot is actually owned by the library, which is, another impediment. And we already heard that the, library is short of parking. Putting a restaurant there trying to serve dinner while the library is, open till 8 would be a disaster.
Yes, all great points, but let's see.
How many restaurants we need?
Mr. Lacoste agrees with you. So any questions from any people that have joined us? Question on the town common. Does the plan include additional structures or fixtures or just one big fancy lawn? No, we included costs for walking paths and a gazebo, I believe, and several other fixtures and different things to be, including lighting and different things like that. So that was all part of it. It's not just a fancy lawn. So,
and the costs associated with the town common, whether there is, leveling, plantings, fixtures, if there's a field, athletic field, those are all eligible to be funded by the Community Preservation Act.
Is that intended to replace the Traeger Town Common, or would the parking present be sufficient to cover the gatherings? Our intent is to have the proper community needs. So besides the parking that's in the back, we also looked at potentially reinforcing or having grass parking areas as well off of those loop roads that were there. So we've looked at that as well. So the intent is that this would provide parking for those events and other, in the future needs that we would have for town common activities. Question on the entrance for the fire engine. There is one entrance for the fire engines. Yeah, they have essentially 4 bays that are being proposed, and that is one big large driveway that comes right out to 114. Let's see.
They're also drive-through bays, Bill, so they can come in and drive through from front to back.
Yep, so they can drive through to park through. Retail space, Andy talked about that earlier in the meeting. When we acquired the property, there is no ability, it has to be for municipal purposes only. Retail space obviously wouldn't meet that, that wouldn't be a municipal purpose. So that's not eligible to be installed in this parcel. The entrance would be for other traffic. So if I jump over to the site plan for a quick second, a couple of questions on the site. Let's kind of show. Oh, there we go. So so this section right here is the exit for the fire department, and this is the main, essentially the main boulevard, if you want to call it that would bring you into the municipal complex. So you have parking for the police and fire station right off of that boulevard. You can continue down this driveway to get to the loop road, which would have some special parking. I would assume half of this would probably be handicap spot parking. And then we have a parking lot that would be adjacent to the town hall, and then this larger parking lot in the back for community center activities, and then spillover as well. And traffic light. Yeah, we've evaluated the potential for a traffic light. In all likelihood, if there was one installed, it would be one that's more of a blinking light that would be activated when there is a call and the fire department needs to leave. The design team included a civil engineer, a traffic engineer to look at this. So, we don't, in all likelihood, we're going to have a reduction in vehicle trips for the complex when compared to peak time of the golf course. But if you look at the project as a whole, we would probably end up needing at least the ability for the fire trucks to get out, so there would be an activated light to allow them to make sure that they can get to their calls. All right. Well, it looks like our chat has slowed down. Do we have any other questions before we call it a night? All right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about next steps. We have another one of these public meetings scheduled for next Tuesday. Basically, it's going to be the same presentation you saw tonight, maybe with a few enhancements to address some of the questions we've heard. That's kind of what we've been doing as we go forward and through. As we hear questions, we try to address those within the PowerPoints. Then we'll be going to a series of different meetings for different local groups. We have some residential groups that we'll be meeting with, as well as the master plan committee. I believe we still have to go back to the planning board, Andy, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Going back to the board of selectmen. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something else because I feel like I have 100 meetings on my calendar. We'll also be at the transfer station, basically answering questions and handing out flyers for folks as well. I'll be there, so feel free to stop in and say hello and ask any questions.
One other thing that, if I can jump in, Bill, the building managers of the fire station, police station, Council on Aging, and Memorial Hall will be hosting open houses on Saturday, May 15th and Saturday, May 22nd. So those will be from, we're expecting to go from 10 to 1. If we need to extend a little bit to accommodate people, we will, but it's an opportunity for people to come in and get see it with their own eyes, the conditions of these buildings. We'll be there to walk you through and guide you through and show you some of the highlights of all 4 of these buildings. So that'll be going out on the website and by e-blast and social media, probably later this week or beginning of next week.
Let's see, the last question. This is a great one to end the meeting on, which is terrific. Anything else that supportive residents can do to help with your sales effort? Yes, definitely. So we have, I would say, point people towards the website for sure. So we have a web page that has essentially the whole background of what we've done in narrative form, and then reports if you want to dive into some of the more details. This PowerPoint presentation will be up there as well. We have flyers that will be available that show, that was in Andy's piece at the end talking about our public outreach efforts. So these flyers are available at Town Hall. I'll have a bunch of those at the municipal complex. You can grab a few to give to your neighbors. If you have any questions at all, you can reach out to Andy or to the board. I believe the committee hasn't. Do we have an email, Andy, or can they reach out to us?
We don't. You can reach out to me at andrew.sheehan, SHEEHAN, at middletonma.gov.
And then Andy will get back to you with any questions. All those questions do filter to the committee, so we do hear about them, and hopefully we're trying to address anything we hear from you folks. And we're hoping that we would have your support at town meeting in about a month. So I think
most important thing is to attend and get your family members and friends to attend town meeting and to vote in favor on June 12th at the town election.
Yeah, those are probably the 2 most important things we can do.
Yeah, we appreciate the support.
And I was just going to suggest, for those who haven't been in these 4 buildings, the tour will be an eye-opener for those who haven't seen how bad a shape these are in. We're at the point where we're on borrowed time. Now, they have deficiencies in their structure, and they have the deficiencies in their applicability to the needs of the town. We kind of glossed over that. We spent a lot of time in the committee working on that. There's just no patching. Band-Aids won't last very long. And to people who want to help support this, make sure everybody that understands the serious deficit the town has in these buildings.
And you can see a video tour of those on the website. So with a QR code here that's in that flyer, as well as just going to the town website. I think the banner is a third of the way down. You can't miss it, and you'll see the videos there. That kind of outline, really explain. They always say a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you have some questions and think, is this really worth the money? I think that will help to show you really why it's needed. So I would encourage you to go take a look at that. Well, the last one I says it's beer o'clock, which I definitely don't disagree with. So I think we can call it a meeting tonight. So I appreciate everyone coming, and we'll probably see you around town somewhere because we're going to be out and about.